Thanks everyone for coming to my talk. First, maybe let's start off with a question. Have you ever wondered how different a AAA and indie studio's processes looks like? For me, I absolutely had this question for the longest time, and I was super curious how are they able to make these grandiose, massive games, and how their processes look like so that they're able to execute on that. So today I would like to give you a little glimpse into that, how indies and AAA studios approach game production. And just a short disclaimer, this is a talk about production and management. If you're not looking for that, this is your time to leave. Good? Okay. Just a few sentences about me. My name is Tadas. I'm from Lithuania originally, but I'm working in Remedy Entertainment right now as a producer. I've been in the games industry for nearly a decade now, but as a producer, I've been working around 5 years. I worked with a couple of Lithuanian game development studios, Tuto Tunes and Sneaky Box, some real pioneers of our industry here. But now I'm in Remedy. And few things I like is I love my dog. I love taking her out for walks. I love going to music festivals. I love visiting museums. And most importantly, I like making games with awesome people. And I am a producer, as I mentioned. And what is games production? What do the producers do? Production is quite an undefined role in a lot of studios. So this craft can look really different in between different studios, as well as in the same studio between different projects. But maybe let's start off with a quote. I like this definition from Steven Tarland from Media Molecule, who says that the producer's role is overseeing a development of a project, managing the development team, schedules, stakeholders, publishers, external teams, and budgets of a project. And in TLDR terms, this is, I would say a producer's role is to manage all aspects of the game development, intending to keep it on time, in budget, in scope, and most importantly, without crunch. Now, today I would like to talk to you a little bit about three different processes that I've noticed through both indie and AAA. Those would be the development stages and how do we do those, how do we do planning, and how does our creative process looks like. Let's start off with the indie development stages. Now, I know some indies don't even follow any development stages. For me, in Lithuania, I used to work with a lot of clients in an indie space, so we had to kind of plan and organize our processes quite well. So, does anybody can name any kind of stage of game development? Planning? Yeah, kind of. Yeah, sure. What I'm pre-production. Thank you. Yes, pre-production. This is the first stage in a game development process. So, what do we do in pre-production? So this is the time when we are ideating and like coming up with the actual ideas. In the indie space, we used to just gather around the whiteboard and prototype things there. On top of that, we're iterating a lot on the features, trying to create a prototype and just constantly reinforcing that, making a lot of concept art, and most importantly, we write a game design document. And this is one of the key things for us because that kind of dictates the rest of the production. What are we going to do? When we have a solid prototype that we're happy with, and we have a game design document, we're moving into production. Now, in production, probably all you know, this is where the most work happens. We're doing all the features, all the enemies, all the locations, audio, VFX, everything that's related to the game itself. At the end of this stage, our main intent is to come out with a game that is fun to play, it's polished, it looks good, it's almost ready for release, but we still have some work to do. We have the pre-release stage. Now, at this stage, we tended to not focus on the game itself that much, whereas we're getting the game up and ready on all of the store platforms. So that means we're doing porting. That means we're getting controller support. We're doing safe systems on multiple platforms. And we're also integrating some features that are given by the store pages. So something like achievements or leaderboards are given by different store platforms. And yeah, at the end of this stage, we should be ready for release. The game is polished, it's bug-free, and it can go and see the light of day. But there's one more stage for us to do, which is the post-release support. Obviously, with a small team, we're not able to find all the issues that can arise in different types of platforms and configurations. So at this stage, we're supporting the game and trying to fix and squash as many bugs as possible. And obviously, if the time and budget allows it, maybe makes a little bit of extra content. Now, how do AAA game development stages look like? In AAA, I've noticed that obviously we are following the pre-production and production pipelines, but because the projects are so large and so time-consuming, we had to break it down into even smaller and smaller stages for us. And here I'll tell you a few things about those. Sorry, my mouth is really dry. First stage for us is the mandate stage. Now, in the mandate stage, that is the time where the game directors and the studio leadership and potentially some partners from outside of the studio get together and try to decide not only what is the game that we're going to be making, but also why. What kind of benefit they see after making this game? What kind of opportunities does that open up? How does it place us in comparison to the competition? Potentially, maybe we want to test some new technology that we haven't tried before. So there's a lot of conversations happening about this, a little bit less about the game itself, more about what kind of opportunities can this bring to the studio. So at the end of this stage, the main goal is to come out with a project justification, strategic goals for the project, and a process how are we gonna achieve those goals. When we have the mandate, next thing we're going into the concept stage. Same as indies, this is where our ideation phase happens, where we're iterating, where prototyping happens. On top of that, we are thinking at a very high level of the game. That means we're thinking about pillars, about goals, and I heard previous person asked about pillars. I'll be coming back to that later. Yeah, so this is where our kind of ideation, and we're figuring out what is the game. And at the end of the stage, our goal is to come out with the solid enough concept that we're happy with and a high-level plan for the rest of the stages. When we have those things, we have our prototype, we're moving into the proof of concept stage. Now, in the proof of concept stage, what we're trying to understand and what we're trying to do is basically build a slice of the game to an alpha quality, basically polish the heck out of a small area of the game first and try to understand what kind of quality target are we trying to meet. At the same time, we're also doing a horizontal slice, which kind of dictates we're building at a very small quality, but we're building everything, trying to understand kind of how wide, how big our game is. So with these two kind of vectors, we can judge how big and at what quality. That means we can assume how big our whole game will be and make an estimate of that. So the goal here for us is to understand what is the scope of the game and to build a slice of the game that kind of proves the core experience for the player. Next, when we have those two slices, next thing for us is the production readiness. And as you can see, kind of the name speaks for itself. We're getting ready for production, but how do we do that? For us, our process kind of initially in the previous stages, it was kind of understood that we're building not final content a lot of the time, so we can scrap things, reiterate, and remove stuff from the game or kind of come up with new stuff. But here, our main kind of goal is to start building final content. And not only that, we're building final content with final tools and final processes. So we're kind of stress testing our whole development cycle with the teams that we have, with the tools that we have, and seeing if anything breaks. and we have enough time to fix it in this specific stage. So the goal here for us is to kind of nail down the final process and the final tools, and to come up with a proper enough plan to understand how is the rest of our production going to look like. And when we have this, we are officially in production. And in production, our first stage is alpha, and I specifically separated this into two parts, which is pre-alpha and alpha. Why I did that? In a large sense, in a large project like AAA, we have multiple teams or multiple crafts working on different pieces of the game at any given time. That means we have some teams who start earlier, make a little bit of a content, hand it off to another team, they contribute to that content more, and then it kind of rolls down. You can imagine it like a waterfall. Some teams start high, and then the work trickles down. So this is those teams, we call them upstream teams and then downstream teams. Now, if this term is confusing for you, I'll come back to it later. But for the upstream teams that are going to be completing content first, we are setting a deadline for them earlier, which is the pre-alpha. And for the rest of the teams, it's going to be complete all of the work at alpha. And at the end of the alpha stage, our main goal is to come out with a feature-complete game, having all the things that we want to do. It might not be polished and fully functional at the end of the alpha stage, but that's why we have one more stage to go, which is the beta stage. And in this stage, similarly to indies, this is like the pre-release stage where we're bug fixing, we're testing a lot, testing not only internally, but we're inviting people from outside of the studio to kind of stress test our game and see how they like it. We're getting everything ready for the stores. We're bug fixing and all that good jazz. And basically, this is our beta stage. Polish, polish, polish. And then we're going to release. And we're live. And in the live stages, similar to indies, we're supporting the game when it comes out. If any bugs or issues arise, this is where the team is still continuing their work to support the project that kind of exists as a live product. Now, with AAA games, I've also noticed that it tends to release DLCs from 1 to 3 DLCs per game, but those are kind of most of the time considered as separate projects inside of the studio. And in conclusion, I'd like to say that both indie and AAA studios follow pre-production production stages to specifically differentiate the ideation phase and the development phase. Now, while indie stage process focuses mainly on the game, AAA studios expand the focus to include studio needs or partner needs as well. AAA stage process adds more stages to figure out specific areas of a project before production. And both indie and AAA teams adapt their stage process to fit the scale of the team and the size of the game that they're making. Now let's talk a little bit about planning. So I think for a good producer, this is the #1 thing that a good producer needs to learn how to do. So how to kind of foresee future events happening. Let's talk a little bit how I used to do that in the indie scope, indie sense. When starting a project, we kind of know where we are. We know what's happening, and as I mentioned, I used to work with clients a lot. So when we have a client, the client has specific needs to hit a specific date. I don't know if it might be arbitrarily, but sometimes a client has a very good reason to have that date. So that would be they want to participate in an event and showcase something there, or has a marketing campaign and needs to hit a specific date. So that is kind of our shipping date. Now, with our previous teams that we used to work with, we kind of been able to nail down the pre-release stage and understand how long does it take us to complete that pre-release stage and get the game up and running on multiple platforms. So we just place that amount of time at the end of the timeline first. Then we sit down with our teams internally and start discussing how much time would it make sense for us to spend on pre-production. Pre-production and ideation can happen in a week, can happen in a month, or it can span years. So for a producer, it's basically we have to set some sort of a boundary of time where we are not going to exceed our kind of ideation phase. So that's how we kind of set our pre-production phase in an indie sense. And the rest is production. Basically, the rest of the time we're going to be working on the features. Now, placing that on the calendar. We are getting specific time, understanding how much time we have to dedicate and to work on these things. And when we have that, next thing for us is to come up with a team. Smallest projects I shipped with was just one developer and one artist, but it tends to be we have a lot larger teams on a lot of our projects. So let's say we have a senior developer starting early in pre-production, iterating, continuing through production and until the end in pre-release. We have one mid-level developer joining a bit later to support the senior developer in production. We have an artist to set art direction and going until the end of the release. And we have a producer who's maintaining this whole process and flow. And this would be our kind of high-level plan for a project. When we have all these things decided, we can kind of come up with a budget by just multiplying the amount of team members we have and how much are we paying them versus time that we're going to be spending with them on a project. And this gives us our budget. And we're sharing this with our both external partners and internally. When we have this, next we are going into actual work planning. As I mentioned, in pre-production, we're ideating, we're coming up with stuff, and in the specific amount of time that we have, we're trying to answer how does our art look like, how does our gameplay look like, and when we have those answers, we're writing, most importantly, a game design document. This document outlines every feature that we want to build and what does it do, and with that information, we're populating our production phases, just trying to see if anything falls out of the reasonable amount of time that we want to spend on this kind of a project. And lastly, in pre-release, we're bug fixing, we are balancing, we're porting all of the things, and this is how I used to do work planning on like a daily, weekly basis or whatever. And this was a bit iterated upon, but this was kind of the thing we settled down later. Now, how does AAA do planning? So initially, we start with similar ideation, but when we have initial lists of the features that we want to do, we tend to kind of structure them, and we build this thing that's called a PBS, project breakdown structure, or a work breakdown structure. For the project breakdown structure, we are kind of identifying the highest level work and breaking it down into smaller and smaller pieces, so it is manageable, understandable, and we kind of can decide on a daily basis what we're working on. But the first large pillar for us is the component pillar. So those things would be like your player, your NPCs, your world, your quests. Almost all of the games have some semblance of these things, so it's kind of hard to gauge what kind of build you're building at this stage. But that's why we are breaking it down even further. And the player has multiple things under it. So that would be your player weapons, your player camera, your player animations, your player abilities, and everything related to the player. Similarly to other things, we break that down into smaller as well. So those would be our themes. When we have our themes, next thing for us is the features. Those would be the actual things that we're going to be building with multiple teams. So that would be your first gun, first ability, second ability, all of the animations that we want to have in the game. So those would be kind of listed as a feature. Next, we are breaking it down into smaller piece, which we call an epic. Just a side note, all of these terms come from Jira, and Jira is like the #1 project management and IT tool for game development and for project management, basically. So an epic, what is the epic? So it kind of, for us, comprises of two parts. First is what team is going to be working on this feature, and second, what the quality level of the feature is. So to give an example, we have a team working on a gun, which is the modeling team, but before them there was a concept art team, and before them there was a game design team and narrative team, and later after them there's going to be an animation team. I'll give a slide about that as well. So we kind of get a list of every team that is contributing to this feature. On top of that, we are identifying the quality levels that we want to build at. That means building a small piece of content first early and implementing it in game to kind of test it and feel it out is very valuable for us. We don't want to spend a lot of time for that, but when we get an understanding how does it work in game with other features as well, we can continue on the rest of the quality level, so that reaching it alpha. So this is how we kind of would do it. We comprise epics from two parts. And then we are breaking the epics down into even smaller pieces. So that would be your tasks. That would be the team's day-to-day kind of work. So that would be in this example, we would be building a placeholder model, just a white box, and then we're applying some basic textures to kind of get a sense of this gun that we're building. So this would be the project breakdown structure. Next, we start doing dependency mapping. And as I mentioned, multiple teams working together and handing content off from one to the other. That means we're getting the early teams to do their passes first. So that would be your narrative team writing how does this gun fit in the world and with the character. Maybe they have some special relationship with the weapon. And then game design describes what does this weapon do in the world, what kind of attacks does it do, and etc. And then it gets handed off to concept art. They make art for it. They kind of show it in the world, in players' hands, contextualize it. Next, it goes to modeling. They create a model for that. Then it goes to rigging. They kind of define the rules, which parts move, which parts don't. Goes into animation. Animation kind of actually adds those movements. And then it goes to the downstream team. So this would be kind of the breakdown. Some teams are upstream because nobody can do work until they have finished their pass. And the downstream teams sometimes can overlap and can do work in tandem, and we need to leave a specific amount of time for them so that they would be able to complete their work on time. So this is the pre-alpha kind of what I mentioned before. Next, estimations. Now, estimations are a massive thing. It's quite difficult and hard to kind of guess how long does it take for you to build a thing that you have never built before. But let's imagine, let's take an example that a team has already built similar game before or a similar feature before. So they're able to kind of give some numbers, how long would it take them to actually finish their work. And we're getting all of these numbers from different kinds of teams to understand how long do we need to dedicate for each team. And when we have both the dependencies and the timelines estimates, we are building a timeline. This is an example of a Gantt chart. We're actually finally placing all of those estimates and work on a calendar to understand when are we getting this feature in the game. Cool, so we have our timeline, we have our estimates, we have our teams identified, we have our content identified. What is next? One of the last things we do, and this is something that we kind of do day to day, it's a very iterative and involved process, it is the capacity versus workload checks. Now, let's imagine in this scenario, we have team 1 working for 15 weeks. That means we have 3 people working 5 weeks each. That gives us the capacity of 15 weeks. In production readiness, that's the PR column, we add 2 more people, and then it becomes 25 weeks, and etc. The amount of people times the amount of time they're going to be spending, this is our capacity. And next, we're comparing with all of the estimates for the team. So let's say team 1 has 13 weeks of estimates or workload, and we're comparing that with the team 1's capacity, which is 15 weeks. We're in the green. We can still complete this work. Moving down the line, we can see that in pre-alpha, they have identified 67 weeks of work, but they just have 60 weeks of capacity. That means they're over. That's when a producer steps in and starts the conversation. Are we able to de-scope somewhere? Are we able to lower the quality level somewhere? And that is kind of all of those checks that we're trying to do, and that is on like a weekly basis. Basically, some teams are not able to identify their work. it is too complicated. It's something is not designed, something is unclear. We can just leave that as a placeholder in terms of a question mark. But for a producer, this is super important to identify all of the work that has not been accounted for as early as possible. So these are the comparisons that we're doing: capacity versus workload. And yeah, this is how we do our planning things. So both indies and AAA try to identify all the features that they're going to be working on as early as possible. While indies have one cross-functional team, AAA has a lot of teams that need to work together, and we need to understand what are their dependencies. Now, estimation is a super vital part for both indies and AAA to understand how long is their project going to take. It doesn't need to be 100% accurate. It can be a ballpark. It can be just a roll of the dice most of the times. But having some numbers is more important than having nothing. And lastly, while AAA studios reiterate on their plans, in the indie space, I tend to find it is a bit more difficult to change the plans when you already have signed a budget with a client. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about the creative process and how did we do those things in both senses. So indies, as I mentioned, I've used to work with clients, and we used to make some games of our own as well. Now, with clients, I have worked with clients that don't have any game development background. And for them, the key process is to identify the story first and kind of flush out the story early, because I've found that non-game development clients want a game to improve their existing business or service in some way, so they kind of need to be involved in the story creation part as early as possible to align with them, to reiterate them, and kind of give them a sense of ownership of the project. We're kind of making the client part of the game development team most of the times. Next, for us, for the clients, it's quite key to understand the art direction and how does that tie in with the story and their brand and everything that revolves around them. So we're also aligning with the client quite regularly on this part. And lastly, we have the interactivity and the gameplay side of things. So when we have both the story and the art identified, then we're kind of discussing what kind of game are we trying to build, obviously aligning on that. So with non-game development clients, the key thing is keep them involved, keep them as part of your team most of the times. You will be happy, they will be happy. I've also worked with clients that are game developers themselves. And for them, it is completely opposite. They start thinking about gameplay first, and they want prototypes early. And this is what we tend to do. Basically, we build a lot of prototypes, we iterate with them, we test the game together, we analyze what kind of game are we building, and we're refining that all over again. So prototype, prototype, prototype with a game development client together. And lastly, let's talk a little bit about how if an indie studio does not have a publisher, does not have a client, how do they come up with ideas themselves? I really have to give a big shout out to Sharif Yones, who's the CTO of a studio called Ikima Show Games. He was a great friend, and he was working with us at Remedy at one point as well. And for him and his studio, one of the key things to do is basically to start doing internal game jams. Let your team come up with ideas and let them create prototypes, propose them, and the whole team kind of together decides what is the most interesting for them to build, and that's how they come up with the initial ideas. When we have those ideas, they're mainly looking for immersiveness in their line of work. They're building VR games, so immersiveness is the #1 thing that they are looking for. And they are completely non-compromising on this part, so they're continuously iterating on the process, even in the most latest of stages. I think he mentioned he tweaked the game quite a lot, like a week before release. So thank you to Sharif, and yeah, if you have a chance, please check out Tiger Blade. Cool. Now let's talk how does a AAA creative process looks like. These games are massive, and we have a lot of the teams, and if everybody would be doing anything that they want, we would have chaos. So how do we deal with all of those ideas? The number one thing for us is to start off with player-facing pillars. So those would be kind of the things that we are defining. How does a player feel? How does the player look like in the world? And kind of describe from the player's perspective. And here we're trying to answer kind of three key things. So that would be how does the player feel? What is the game's genre? And what are the 3 C's? And 3 C's are character, camera, and controls. When we have the player-facing pillars, we are going into individual teams, individual contributors to the project, especially leads, who kind of take those pillars and break them down into their own language through their own perspective and lens. So your gameplay team would have their action pillars, your world team would have your kind of exploration pillars, and then your narrative team would have the narrative, the story pillars, etc. So pillars can sound something like player's choice matters. That can involve things in narrative, that can involve things in action. Offense is the best defense. That's a very good pillar, kind of describes that we're having an action game that we're pushing forward. And multiple approaches to the story. So this would be a narrative pillar. And when we have our pillars, both player-facing and gameplay-facing, we're coming up with goals. So that's what we're aiming to meet, what kind of things that we're aiming to build. Those are not features. Those are intent. It's a goal, what we would like to build. With the goals defined, we are kind of identifying our rules, kind of what is the box that we are operating in, and what is the thing that then we kind of identify we're not passing the boundaries of this box. And for the team, it's harder. Like a creative limit can also be a very good tool to engage creativity. And when we have our rules, last thing for us is intent. So what do we actually want to build? And talking through things what we actually want and not describing things what we don't want has been a very vital part. So talk about things that you actually want. So this would be kind of the highest level, the very earliest parts of AAA game production. Basically set ourselves specific pillars, describe them through gameplay, and then set goals and rules for the project. Now, when we have all those things, the leads come back to their teams, and then the teams start generating ideas, a lot of ideas, and then we're collecting everything in a nice little bundle. And with those ideas, then we're kind of thinking, okay, what can we execute? And how do we make those decisions? So we basically take this whole list and bring it to the directors, and then the directors sit down and kind of order this list in the priority based on the goals and the pillars that they want to reach. So they identify the key things that they think would serve their project best. And then when we have this list, we can take like first 5 items from this list and then hand it off to the team. They make prototypes from it, they make concept art from it, and they basically try to look through the lens of those goals and pillars and create content for that. And at the end of, before I move on, so I think for us the key thing is to kind of set amount of time that we're going to be spending on this. We tend to kind of set a limit of 2 weeks per each feature. And at the end of those 2 weeks, we come back to the directors, we present our ideas, we discuss them, we can kind of describe how are we intending this feature to work with our goals. And if they like it, we continue on the prototype. If that's not what we're looking for, we put it on a shelf. Now, at the end of the concept phase, then we start picking and choosing things off that shelf and try to incorporate those things together and make a functional prototype, basically, out of those interesting ideas. All of those selections are being done through directors. And we don't have a single director. There's a team of directors most of the time. So those would be kind of the very earliest phases of ideation in a AAA sense, but then we tend to continue on our creativity, and that is through small contributions to specific features. Each team, we consider them as a very vital part to the process, and their things like concept art can like highlight specific details, and a lot of creativity goes into concept art, but not only that, into the contributions of other teams continuing on the features development. So you can see we have a character named Rose. She's a waitress in Oh Dear Diner, and she's madly in love with the main character, Alan Wake. And when going into costume design, you can see a lot of details, a lot of love went into these assets that we continue working on. And you might have noticed as well, I've been showcasing a lot of art from the game in the background of my slides. So thank you, and a big shout out to all of our team members on Remedy, who has been kind enough to share some art with me. So you can see a lot of details, and I can encourage you to do two things. Observe the assets of the game that you're playing and see how much love went to those assets. And also, if you like a game, check out what has been posted on ArtStation and give a like to the artist. I think that means a lot to them. And that is it. So these were the differences I've observed between indie and AAA. I think both of these kind of styles really encapsulate the scope that they're working on and the things that they're trying to build. My name is Tadas Migauskas, and I would be happy to take your questions. And if I'm out of time, please reach out. I'm happy to answer something on LinkedIn.
Thanks a lot. That was a lot, and yeah, thanks for such a nice crowd. Let's do, yeah, we have time. It's okay. Let's do some questions if we have. Yeah, so please, we have another microphone there, so we'll be faster.
Yep. Thank you. So great presentation, first of all. Secondly, you kind of mentioned, maybe I just misheard, that you try to not to focus on not what to do for a game and also on what to do. What is the reasoning behind it, or did I just mishear it?
I think the reasoning for that is basically there's a million and one things that we don't want to do, and kind of when we have an iteration and we're coming to a director, having feedback like, no, this is not what I want entirely, does not help anybody. That kind of process will create a lot of iteration without any specific kind of direction. While having things like maybe less of this, more of that, or like I want to have, I don't know, this represented because I think this movie or this kind of photograph had a very good reference, serves us a lot better to kind of get the creative juices flowing. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks. Do we have someone else?
Thank you, Tadas. Awesome presentation. I was wondering, do you think that there are things that an indie studio could do that a AAA studio does and vice versa in the process?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you are not doing that, I suggest you to differentiate the ideation phase and the creation phase, and specifically think about, when thinking about estimation, it tends to be that it's not a specific guess how long you're going to be taking. It can be a time box if you have no idea. So how much time are we dedicating to iteration? So implement some time boxing or estimating, and then expand on that and create times where you work on ideation, and then understand how much time do you have left for the rest of the production.
Thanks.
Quick question about the pre-production stage for AAA that you mentioned that was not represented with indies. Like I noticed that we do have some of those processes with indies as well, so I think it could be maybe something that differs from studio to studio.
Yeah.
One thing that's really challenging, and it would be nice to hear your opinions about how you tackle it, is like the resources that are not always full-time, as well as resources that are fluctuating. So people that, you know, sometimes are part-time or sometimes can contribute, can lead to like longer production cycles. So the iteration loop is much longer compared to probably a larger studio. So what do you think are some of the things that indies can do to scope better when the finances are not clear, people are coming and going, and it's a much more volatile environment basically compared to something that's more can be planned?
A good question. I'll try to imagine. So I would start personally with the things that we do know and try to list all of those things out. And as a producer, I would try my best identify all the unknowns. So we don't have unknown unknowns. We have at least known unknowns. And then when we have those, that's when we are kind of can have a conversation and a process of how are we tackling each one. Maybe some things require resourcing, HR, a hiring. Maybe something requires like more time. Or if more time is not available, can we descope? So kind of identifying unknown unknowns first into known unknowns, and then proceeding that, tackling one by one.
Thank you. Do we have someone else? Or we can. Well, no. Before thanking Tadas, I remembered one cool thing from when we worked together about your dog, because like that was my small achievement. I was responsible for PR of Sneaky Box, and his dog picture was accepted to Games Industry Biz, because they did during COVID. They did this, nice thing. So I was very happy. And
yeah. That was
cool
a
story.
big milestone for both me and my dog. She had puppies during COVID, and we took the picture of the puppies, posted that into Games Industry Biz, and that got posted as like the title.
Yeah, it was.
Image,
it was the main picture even of the list of developers' pets. So yeah, I just wanted to share that.
There you go.
So yeah, thanks Tadas a lot. That was so cool. And yeah, please talk to him.